What I want us to try now is finding the measures of missing angles, giving some of the information. And we've already had practice talking about the angles at a point, and we've talked about adjacent angles and vertical angles. And so now what we're going to do is actually do some practice problems from our textbook. So if you want to label on here what we're doing, this is actually from the Singapore Math 6B textbook, and this is page 48. And we're going to work on page 49. You don't have to have your book with you because I'm going to put the problems on here. But it is problems number 1 through 3. And I do want you to make sure that you are labeling these correctly. So the first problem we're going to work, I want you to label 1A. And we're going to go ahead and draw two lines that intersect, something like this. So this is problem 1A, and we're going to have this first angle is going to be labeled as 48 degrees. So go ahead and label that on your own paper. And then we're actually going to have an angle vertical to this angle, and we're going to say that it is x. And what we're going to be after is what is the measure of x degrees. Go ahead and pause the video, draw this, and you put down what the measurement of x degrees is. Okay, now you've had a minute to do that. I hope it didn't take you very long at all because there's a couple things we can remember. The easiest way to solve this problem would be to remember that the 48-degree angle and then the angle across from it. In fact, let me give it some names. Let me label these points A, B, C, and D, and we're going to have O where the points meet. And what I could realize is that angle AOC, which we're going to highlight in pink here, AOC, this angle, and then this angle I'm going to put in blue, angle BOD, those are vertical angles. We know that vertical angles have the same measures. We know that angle X has to be 48 degrees. If you couldn't remember that, then one thing you could do is you could recognize that we have a straight line. AB is a straight line, or AOB is a straight angle, I should say. And so we'd recognize that it has to be 180, and we'd recognize we have a 132-degree angle up here, and then that COD is also a straight angle. 132 plus 48 is 180. But the easiest way is to remember that vertical angles have the same measure. So for 1A, we need to put that X, angle X, has a measure of 48 degrees. And I want you to circle that as your answer, and then we're going to move on and we're going to do 1B. For problem 1B, here's what I want us to do. We're going to draw a vertical line, and it's going to be C, D, and then we'll draw a diagonal line like this, and it's going to be B, A, and then we'll have O once again being the center point where they meet. Okay, and this time we're giving that angle BOD right here is 136 degrees, and X, which is our unknown angle, is right here. It's angle COA. And the question is, what is the measure of X? Go ahead and draw this as well and put what you think the measure of angle X is. When you're finished with that, you can start the video again and we'll talk about the answer. Okay, once again, I hope you got that the answer to the measure of angle X was equal to 136 degrees. And of course, the reason is that BOD and COA are vertical angles. We have two straight lines. They share a vertex and are across from one another. Therefore, they have the same measure. Let's try one now. This is going to be 1C, where the angles are not vertical angles. Okay, so this is going to be 1C. And when we get to problem C, what we're actually going to see is we're going to draw, once again, a pair of straight lines. And on that pair of straight lines, we're going to have line A, B, and then we're going to have line CD slanting the other way, and we're going to once again have O in the middle, and we're going to be given two vertical angles. This AOD is 100 degrees, and then COB, because it's vertical, is also 100 degrees. And this time, the question's going to be, and I'm going to use two arcs to show that this angle is different than the others. Angle DOB is X. And I want you to make this drawing on your own and then pause the video and try to use what we know about angles at a point to figure out what is the value of X. Pause the video and do that right now. Okay, welcome back. What we see is this. There's more than one way to do this problem, but the easiest way is to recognize that angle AOB is a straight line. Now, if AOB is a straight line, then it is 180 degrees, which means that the sum of the two adjacent angles have to be 180. So if AOD is 100 degrees, then that means angle X has to be 80 degrees. There's a name for that. This is called a linear pair. It's a pair of adjacent angles that form a straight angle together, and so we should get 80. If we wanted to check that, we should also recognize that AOC is also, it's vertical to DOB, so it's also 80 degrees, and we should always, if we add up the angles around a point, get 360. And we know that 100 and 100 is 200, and 80 is 160, and 200 plus 160 is 300 degrees, so we know it's right. So let's circle 80 degrees to know that's right. And that's how we do 1, A, B, and C. The next part we're actually going to label number 2, and we're going to use a reflex angle. So what I want you to do is to label this as number 2, problem A, and we're actually going to draw an angle faces. It almost looks like a greater than sign. And here's what we're given. We're given a reflex angle. Remember from when we talked about types of angles, a reflex angle is greater than 180 degrees. So the reflex angle here actually goes around this way. And the measure of this reflex angle is going to be 310 degrees. And then on the inside, we have a smaller angle. We can tell by looking at it that it's an acute angle, and this is going to be X. And so the question is going to be, what is the measure of angle X? I think you probably know how to figure this out. Why don't you pause the video, copy this drawing, and write down what you think angle X should equal. Okay, I hope you paused the video and tried to figure it out. Now what we notice here is there's really just two angles. There's the reflex angle, and then there's the angle that is not a reflex angle, which is an acute angle. But what we should recognize is these two angles go around a point. And we know the angles around a point have a sum of 360. And so, if I know that there are 360 degrees around a point, and there's 310 degrees in the reflex angle, then the other angle should be the difference, which is 50 degrees. And so on this problem, X is 50 degrees, and we can always check that by making sure that there's 360 degrees around a point. Okay, let's try what we're going to call 2B next. And 2B has actually 5 angles, and they don't form a straight line. So we have a center point here that we're going to call point O, and from point O it's got 5 rays. It's got a ray that goes to A, and then it has a ray that goes to B, and notice these don't form a straight line, and so they're not going to be, it's not going to be 180 degrees. We won't have any vertical angles formed when we intersect it. There's also from O to C, and then OD. I believe I misspoke earlier, said there were going to be 5 rays, but there's actually just 4 rays. And then we see that this angle BOC has a measure of 95 degrees, and then AOC has a measure of 100 degrees, and then AOD has a measure of 110 degrees. And the unknown angle is DOB, which we'll call X. And so I want you to copy this drawing, and I want you to figure out the measure of X. Okay, I hope you've taken some time to figure that out. Let's look and see. I think the first thing we need to do is to measure the 3 angles we know, or to calculate the total of the angles we know. We know we have 110 degrees, 100 degrees, and 95 degrees. And so if we add all those up, then we recognize that what we have is actually 305 degrees. Now we know that all the angles around a point are always 360 degrees. So to find the missing angle, we should take the total measure minus the measure we know, and the difference should be the measure of angle X. And so angle X is 55 degrees. And I hope you got that correct as well. Now let's do one more for number 2. We'll do number 2C next. So for 2C, what we have here is we actually have 4 rays coming from O. We have OA, OC, OB, and OD. What we notice about angle AOC is it's got that square in the corner. And of course, what does the square in the corner mean? Well, it means we have a right angle. We won't have to write the degrees because we know anytime we see that square that the angle's 90 degrees. Then we also see angle AOD is an acute angle with a measure of 60 degrees, and angle BOD is an obtuse angle with a measure of 100 degrees. And we're going to try to figure out angle COB, which is X degrees. Why don't you pause right now and see if you can calculate what you think that angle is. Okay, I hope you've taken the time to pause and figure out what you think the angle is. Well, all we need to do is just add the degrees we have once again. 100 plus 60 is 160, and the key to this problem is remembering that the other angle, even though the measure is not written, that it's 90. And so if we do 160 plus 90, then what we find is that adding those will give me 250 degrees. Now we know that all of it has to be 360 degrees, so if we subtract 250, we find that it is 110 degrees that we have not accounted for yet. And so angle X has to be 110 degrees, and I hope that's what you got. The final set of angles we're going to look at is number 3 from page 49 in your book, and it actually has 4 angles and only gives us 1. But the difference here is we know a couple of things. We know that RN is a straight line, and we know that BY is a straight line. And of course that means that BOY is a straight angle and RON is also a straight angle. And so what I want you to do is think there's actually 2 ways that we could be able to tell that the measure of angle X. Why don't you pause the video and think of what you think is the easiest way to solve this problem and find angle X. Okay, I hope you've tried that. The first way I want to talk about is what I think is the easiest way. It's to recognize that we have straight angles. And of course the measure of a straight angle is 180 degrees. So if we say that angle, for example, RON is 180 degrees, and we recognize that BOR is 45 degrees, then we know that angle X is the rest. And so that would actually give us 135 degrees for angle X. We could also check it this way in case you weren't so certain on the straight angle. We could remind ourselves that we have vertical angles here. And so that we have 2 45-degree angles. And of course 45 and 45 is 90 degrees. And so some people are comfortable saying if the 2 vertical angles are 90, then the 2 other angles must add up to be 270. And if those 2 angles are vertical, well, angles YOR and BON are also vertical angles, and they have to be the same. And so they would each be half of 270. And if we did 270 divided by 2, we would also get 135. And so that is the answer to number 3. I hope we're getting pretty good by this point of angles at a point.